Thank you very much. I'd like to discuss some ideas that I've been working on or thinking about with Sean Cole at Harvard Business School, Dan Bjorkegren, who's was a grad student in economics, but and has a tech background and is now at Brown University, Raisa Fabregas, who's a student at the Kennedy School, a PhD student there, and Alice Zhang, who just completed an MBA. So several of us in this team had been involved in studies of agricultural extension, and particularly mobile phone agricultural extension. And the academic work that we had done on this both got us excited about the potential. So I wanted to describe a little bit about why and about a possible vision for a way forward. Okay. So Sean Cole and I are both development economists, and as are many of the other people on this team. And the productivity of many smallholder farms in the developing world seems to be below potential. It's actually an old topic in development economics, and arguably we've come full circle. There was an idea that smallholder farmers were not producing to their potential, then a reaction to that, and an idea that they were maximally efficient, taking advantage of all opportunities. And I think now there's an increasing recognition that not everybody in any industry is ever fully at the maximal productivity frontier. That's not true for industries in the United States, and it's not true in developing countries either. And of course, if farmers aren't all automatically at the frontier of productivity, that suggests that there might be potential for agricultural extension. And in fact, obviously, governments and others have been investing in agricultural extension for a long time. But for most farmers in the developing world, there's very limited sources of agricultural extension, or maybe more broadly, agricultural information. So government extension services are very often quite broken. So let me talk about several dimensions of that. First, organizationally. There's just, government bureaucracies don't always function perfectly, and that might be particularly true in a lot of developing countries. And the fact is, a lot of extension agents rarely make it to the field, partly because they don't have fuel for their motorcycles, partly because they have very limited accountability. There's also spatial constraints. So farmers are dispersed, and while there may be cases like we heard of where wheat is just wheat, there are also lots of cases where there's lots of fine variation in soil composition, in microclimate, and you really need to tailor agricultural extension advice to fairly precise areas. But these massive agricultural extension services often give much coarser messages with a recommendation for an entire region of a country, for example. They're temporally constrained. So most farmers don't see agricultural extension agents. They're certainly not going to see agricultural extension agents frequently. But one of the things we've learned from behavioral economics is that timely information makes a difference. If it's now time to weed, and you've got a particular pest, or you need advice on that, getting that advice 9 months earlier before that pest is there may not be that useful. There's that's a temporal constraint. So all of these things mean that there's actually a quite wide consensus that a lot of public agricultural extension services organized on traditional lines, which governments are spending a lot of money on, are not necessarily that effective. Where do farmers get information? Well, one big place they get information from is from input dealers. But of course, they have a financial interest in selling particular products. I don't know how much Sean Cole, who I understand presented earlier today, was able to cover this, but there are really terrible cases. In joint work with Nilesh Fernando and Sean, they found agro-dealers were really promoting very dangerous pesticides that were totally unnecessary when there were cheaper, safe alternatives available, for example, in their work in India. So there's been a movement towards saying, well, look, the public system isn't working. Why don't we have private agricultural extension, and the farmers will just pay the private agricultural extension service for their advice. There may be some cases in which that can work. I don't want to totally write it off, but that's also subject to some pretty severe problems. So 2 market failures I'll highlight in particular. First, information is very different than many other goods. If you sell information to me, you may not get the full benefit of that because I can pass that information on to neighbors, and the person producing the information or selling the information may not get the full value. And we see something like this in all the problems of, say, the music industry. People are sharing the music and they can't appropriate the full value of it. Same thing can happen with agricultural advice. But another issue that's an even deeper issue is I can listen to music and decide whether I like it. If I'm a farmer and an extension agent is coming to me and telling me something, how do I know that that advice is worth paying for? Especially if it's hard to learn from a single season often. So this certainly inhibits the growth of private agricultural extension on a subscription-based model, where the farmer on a case-by-case basis is paying for it. Also, just practically, these farmers have very little money. There's huge customer acquisition costs. It's probably not really a scalable. I'm sure there's some niche markets where this will work, but that's probably not going to transform agricultural productivity in developing countries. So our belief is that there's a number of technological changes that are really increasing the scope for agricultural extension. So there's a range of them, including new sensors that can pick up soil composition, that can weather information so you know how much soil moisture there is. There's some very interesting things going on, and really developed country agriculture is starting to be transformed by what's called precision agriculture that uses a vast amount of this data. One key technological change in the developing world is the rapid spread of the mobile phone. And we think that this offers an opportunity to deliver at least some form of information. I don't want to say it completely replaces human beings. It could complement it, or that it's necessarily as good as what you could get in an ideal situation with human beings. But a lot of information could be delivered, could be tailored to the spatial location of farmers, could be delivered at the time of year when farmers need that information at very low marginal cost. So what would we have in mind? Well, obviously, I discussed the agroclimatic conditions. You could tailor recommendations to a very particular region with mobile phones. Things like soil chemistry, local weather forecasts, what pest outbreaks there are. But you could go beyond that. So there's been some efforts to provide sort of very simple market information on prices to farmers. Those have a mixed record. But I think you could go much beyond that. You could say, for example, this type of fertilizer might work for you, and the closest dealer to you that has that is in this town, and it's this shop. You could do things like demand supply aggregation and sales leads. So for example, if you knew that a bunch of farmers had their tomatoes ready, you might provide that information to a dealer who then might say, hey, I'm going to take a truck out to that area and pick those things up. You could, very importantly, if you're dealing in the developed world where farmers are, many farmers are highly educated, they've got a lot of capital available. Am I running out of time? Or? Oh my goodness, okay, I better vastly speed up, sorry. You could tailor this to farmers' education, their land availability, their labor availability, even their risk preferences. Okay? So you could tailor information very well. Now, what's more, you could learn over time, as technology firms do. You could constantly be running experiments. What's the best way to deliver information that farmers find most valuable, that they react to? You could get reports back from farmers on how the advice you've been giving, how did that work out in practice for them? And then, much like Netflix, so Netflix will say, I will tell Netflix, did I like a movie? Because I know that means Netflix is going to be able to use its algorithm to predict what other movies I'll like. Similarly, if I tell Netflix, this fertilizer didn't work out for me, that could allow this an entity that was doing this to provide better information, but it could also improve its algorithm and give better recommendations to other farmers with similar characteristics. Okay? So you could have a dynamic learning system and improve the quality of this type of system over time. Okay? What's more, what could the impact of this be? Well, in the work that Sean's done with co-authors in India, some of the work that I've been involved in Kenya, found, and some other work suggests that you could get significant increases in agricultural productivity on the order of 10%. this could also have climate benefits because you could help people adapt to climate change, and you could perhaps, a graduate student named Islam has done incredible work showing that you can reduce fertilizer use and increase output in Bangladesh, so suggesting environmental benefits. I suggest, there may be other benefits to this data beyond just better information for farmers. I don't think this could work by selling this to farmers. I think that's a pipe dream. However, there are other ways you could finance something like this. So contract farming organizations, sugar companies, dairy cooperatives, they often want extra supply. It may be worth it to them. These things are very cheap to deliver. Even though they're only making a certain margin on increased output, they may be willing to pay for the services for their farmers and make a profit from it. And some of our work suggests that, preliminary work suggests this would be profitable. Obviously, governments or international organizations or large foundations could help do this for staple crops. So we think that, and there are other possible sources of revenue. You could think about advertising over time, much the way Facebook would or Google would do this. You could think about telcos paying for this to the actual economic costs, if you do it in off-peak hours, are incredibly small, especially with data costs coming down, smartphones becoming more available. This could be a way, this could be something that a Google or a Facebook that's very interested in expanding internet access could decide they want to sponsor to help encourage people to sign up to the internet. So we think there's a lot of potential for this, and we're just starting to think about this, but we'd love, in the break, love to get people's reactions or ideas to this idea. Thanks very much.